The first time they dragged her into the mud, no one thought it would be the last time they laughed at her. The sky hung low over the farm that morning, thick with gray clouds and the smell of wet soil. A group of boys stood in a loose circle, their laughter sharp and careless, echoing across the open fields. In the center of it all stood the quiet farm girl, her clothes dusted with hay, her hands rough from work, her expression unreadable. She didn't fight back. She didn't even flinch when one of them shoved her hard enough to nearly knock her over. They thought her silence meant weakness. They were wrong. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the strength hidden in quiet souls. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Her name was Ilara, though most people in town barely used it. To them, she was just the farm girl, the one who kept her head down, spoke little, and spent her days working from sunrise to sunset. Her family's land sat on the edge of town, a place most people only pass through, never really seeing. The old barn leaned slightly to one side, the fence posts were weathered, and the house itself carried the kind of silence that comes from years of hardship. Ilara had grown up in that silence. Her father had once been strong, a man who could carry sacks of grain like they weighed nothing. But illness had taken that strength away piece by piece, leaving him confined to a chair by the window, watching the fields he could no longer tend. Her mother had passed years ago, leaving Ilara to fill the space with more than just chores. She became the hands that worked the soil, the shoulders that carried the weight, and the quiet presence that held the family together. There was no room for complaints, no time for dreams, and certainly no space for fighting back. At school, the distance between her and the other students felt even wider than the fields she worked every day. Her clothes smelled faintly of hay no matter how hard she tried to wash them clean. Her hands bore small cuts and calluses that never fully healed. While others talked about parties, trends, and weekend plans, Ilara sat in the back, her eyes focused on something far beyond the classroom walls. That difference made her a target. It started small, as it often does. A whispered joke here, a mocking glance there. Then it grew louder, bolder. The boys who now stood around her in the mud had turned her into their routine, a source of entertainment in an otherwise dull day. They laughed at the way she walked, the way she spoke, the way she chose silence over confrontation. What they didn't understand was that silence can be a shield, and sometimes it can be a storm waiting to break. Every afternoon after school, while the others went home or gathered in town, Ilara followed a different path. She would walk past the fields, past the old fence line, and into a clearing hidden by tall trees. There, tucked away from prying eyes, stood a small, worn-out shed. Inside, the air smelled of dust and effort, and the wooden floor bore the marks of countless hours of training. It was there that Ilara became someone else. Her movements, once slow and careful, transformed into something precise and powerful. Her quiet eyes sharpened with focus. Her body, shaped by years of farm work, moved with a strength that surprised even her when she first discovered it. What began as a way to release frustration had turned into something much greater. A discipline, a purpose, a fire she kept hidden from the world. She trained alone at first, guided only by old books and videos she could barely access. But eventually someone found her. An old man who lived on the outskirts of town, known to most as a recluse, had once been something very different. He recognized the way she moved, the raw potential in her strikes, the determination in her stance. Without many words, he began to guide her, correcting her form, pushing her limits, teaching her not just how to fight, but how to endure. Under his watch, Ilara became more than just strong. She became a fighter, but she never told anyone, because the world she lived in had already decided who she was. Back in the muddy field, one of the boys shoved her again, harder this time. The others laughed louder, feeding off each other's cruelty. Ilara steadied herself, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. For a brief moment, her eyes lifted, meeting his. There was something different in that look. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, but he didn't notice. None of them did. To them, she was still the same quiet girl who never fought back. So they kept pushing. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. At school, in the fields, wherever they found her, they reminded her of her place in their world. And every time she absorbed it, letting it pass over her like wind over the crops she tended. But something was changing. The weight she carried was growing heavier, not from their words, but from the choice she had yet to make. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Alara stood in the clearing, her breath steady, her fists clenched. The old man watched her in silence, his eyes seeing what others could not. He knew she was ready, but readiness is not the same as decision. The moment came sooner than anyone expected. It was the day of the town's annual fair, an event that brought everyone together, farmers, families, students, and strangers alike. There were games, food stalls, laughter, and for the first time in years, something new, a local fighting tournament. It wasn't meant to be anything serious, just a small competition, a way to entertain the crowd. But for some, it meant more. For the boys who had bullied Alara, it was another stage, another chance to prove their strength in front of an audience. They signed up without hesitation. Alara hadn't planned to go, but her father insisted. He wanted her to take a break to see something beyond the fields, even if just for a day. So she went, standing at the edge of the crowd, her presence as unnoticed as ever, until it wasn't. One of the boys spotted her and nudged the others, a grin spreading across his face. The opportunity was too perfect, too tempting. They called her out. At first, it sounded like a joke. The crowd laughed, thinking it was just another moment of harmless teasing. But the boys didn't back down. They pushed, taunted, challenged her in front of everyone, the quiet farm girl. In the ring against them. All eyes turned to Alara, and for the first time she didn't look away. There was a long, heavy silence as she stepped forward, each movement deliberate, each step carrying years of unspoken pain and hidden strength. The crowd's laughter faded into curiosity, then into something else entirely, uncertainty, because there was something in the way she moved, something they hadn't seen before. The first match began. The boy she faced was confident, almost amused. He circled her casually, throwing light jabs, expecting her to shrink back, to hesitate, to fall into the role she had always played. But Alara didn't move the way he expected. She watched, waited, and when she struck, it was like lightning breaking through a storm. Fast. The sound of impact echoed louder than any laughter that had come before it. The boy staggered, his confidence shattered in an instant. The crowd gasped, their amusement replaced by shock. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't the quiet farm girl they thought they knew. This was something else entirely. Entirely. One by one, the matches continued, and with each one, the truth became impossible to ignore. Alara wasn't just holding her own. She was dominating. The same boys who had once pushed her into the mud now struggled to even land a hit. Their laughter was gone, replaced by confusion, frustration, and a growing sense of fear. And Alara, she remained silent, not out of weakness, but because she no longer needed words. By the time she reached the final round, the entire town was watching with a kind of awe that only comes when reality shatters expectations. The quiet girl they had overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed had become the center of everything, the champion they never saw coming. But the real victory wasn't in the ring. It was in the way she stood afterward, calm, grounded, unchanged by the cheers around her. She didn't seek their approval. She didn't bask in their admiration, because her strength had never been about proving them wrong. It had always been about surviving, about carrying her family, about finding herself in a world that tried to define her. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the noise faded into the evening air, Alara walked back toward the edge of the fairgrounds, the same quiet path she always took. But this time something felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. Before we reach the end, if this story has touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Stories like this remind us that strength isn't always loud, and your support helps keep these messages alive. And here's a special request. Comment a strength in silence if you believe that true power doesn't need to shout. That night, as she returned home, her father looked at her with a quiet pride that needed no words. The fields were the same. The house was the same. The life she carried was still hers to live, but something inside her had shifted. The girl who once stood silently in the mud had found her voice, not through words, but through action. And sometimes that's the loudest kind of strength there is. The next morning, the sun rose just as it always did, casting light over the fields and the life waiting to be lived. Alara stepped outside, her hands ready for the work ahead, her heart steady, her spirit unbreakable, because she knew now she had never been weak. She had simply been waiting for the moment the world would finally see her for who she truly was. And when that moment came, she didn't just stand. She rose. The morning after the tournament didn't feel like victory. It felt quiet, not the same kind of quiet Ilara had known her whole life. The heavy, lonely silence that wrapped around her like a shadow, but a different kind. This quiet carried weight. It carried change. It carried eyes that now saw her. As she stepped into the fields, the soft crunch of dirt beneath her boots sounded louder than usual. The wind moved through the crops in gentle waves, brushing against her like a reminder that life hadn't stopped. The farm still needed her. The work still waited. But somewhere beyond those fields, the world had shifted. News traveled fast in a small town. By the time Ilara reached the far end of the fence, she could already feel it. The difference in how people looked at her. The same neighbors who once barely acknowledged her now paused, watching. Some nodded, some whispered. Some simply stared, trying to reconcile the quiet girl they thought they knew with the fighter they had witnessed. It should have felt good, but it didn't. Because respect born from shock isn't the same as respect born from understanding. And Ilara understood something they didn't. The fight in that ring had been easy compared to everything that came before it. The real battles weren't fought in front of cheering crowds. They were fought in silence, in exhaustion, in the moments where giving up felt easier than continuing. And those battles, they weren't over. As the days passed, the attention didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Students at school began to treat her differently. Some tried to be friendly, awkwardly offering smiles or small talk. Others kept their distance, unsure how to approach someone they had once mocked. And then there were the boys, the same ones who had laughed at her. They didn't laugh anymore. But they didn't apologize either. Instead, they carried something heavier, something harder to face. Shame. Ilara noticed the way they avoided her eyes in the hallways, the way their voices dropped when she walked past. The loud confidence they once wore like armor had cracked, revealing something uncertain underneath. One afternoon, as she stood by her locker, she felt it again, that familiar presence behind her. The air tightened slightly, not with fear, but with memory. She turned. One of them stood there, not with a smirk, not with his usual arrogance, just standing. His hands shifted awkwardly, his gaze flickering between her and the ground. For a moment, neither of them moved. This was the moment she had imagined so many times before, not like this, but in anger, in confrontation, in all the ways pain can twist into something sharp. But now that it was here, she felt none of that. Only stillness. He opened his mouth as if searching for words that didn't come easily. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them. The mud, the laughter, the years of quiet cruelty. And then, finally, something broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. He lowered his head slightly, the smallest gesture, but one that carried more meaning than any apology spoken out loud. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was real. And Ilara, she didn't respond with anger. She simply nodded once. Because forgiveness doesn't always need words either, life didn't suddenly become easy after that. The farm still demanded everything from her. Her father's health didn't magically improve. The long days and longer nights remained unchanged. If anything, the attention made things more complicated. People began to expect things from her: strength, confidence, leadership. They didn't see the exhaustion. They didn't see the moments where her hands trembled from overwork, or the nights she lay awake wondering how long she could keep everything together. But someone did. The old man in the clearing. When Ilara returned to the shed for the first time after the tournament, nothing had changed there. The same worn floor, the same quiet air, the same presence that had guided her from the beginning. He watched her as she stepped inside, his eyes steady as if he had been expecting her all along. There was no praise, no congratulations, only understanding, because he knew what came after victory, the harder part, staying strong when no one is watching, continuing when the applause fades, remembering who you are when the world tries to reshape you. Ilara resumed her training, but it felt different now, not heavier, but deeper. Each movement carried more intention. Each strike held more meaning. She wasn't training to prove anything anymore. She was training to become. Weeks passed and something unexpected began to happen. People started showing up. At first it was just one or two. Curious students who had heard about her. Then more. Some came out of admiration. Others out of curiosity. Fault of curiosity. A few came because they too knew what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside. They didn't come to watch. They came to learn. Ilara hadn't planned for this. She had never seen herself as a teacher, never imagined standing in front of others, guiding them the way she had been guided. But when she looked at them, really looked, she saw something familiar. Herself, not as she was now, but as she had been, quiet, unsure, carrying something they didn't yet know how to face. And in that moment, she understood something important. Strength isn't just about standing up for yourself, it's about helping others stand too. So she stayed. She showed them the basics. The stance, the balance, the control. But more than that, she showed them patience, discipline, respect. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because the strongest lessons are often taught in silence. The clearing that had once been her refuge slowly transformed into something more, a place where strength was built not just in body but in spirit. And somewhere along the way, Ilara stopped being just the quiet farm girl. She became something else. Not just a fighter, but a symbol of resilience and resilience, yes, of quiet courage, of the kind of strength that doesn't need recognition to exist. Before we close this story, if it has touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your support means more than you know, and it helps these powerful stories reach others who might need them. And one more special request. Comment "I believe in quiet strength" if you felt inspired by Ilara's journey. One evening, as the sun dipped low once again, painting the sky in those same golden hues, Ilara stood at the edge of the field looking out over everything she had fought to protect. Her father sat by the window just as he always had, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Peace. Not because life had become easier, but because he knew she was strong enough to carry it. The wind moved gently through the crops, the same familiar sound that had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. But now it felt like more than just wind. It felt like a reminder of everything she had endured, of everything she had become, and of everything still ahead. Because this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the moment the world finally caught up to it. The girl who once stood silently in the mud had become someone no one could ignore. Not because she demanded attention, but because she earned it. And in a world that often mistakes loudness for strength, Ilara proved something different. That sometimes the strongest people are the ones who speak the least, the ones who endure the most, the ones who rise not with noise but with unshakable purpose. And as the last light of the day faded into night, she turned back toward the path ahead, steady, grounded, and unstoppable. Because she knew now, more than ever, her story was never about proving them wrong. It was about finally seeing herself right,